Carl Jung documented something so unsettling that parts of it were never fully published during his lifetime, not because it lacked evidence, but because it challenged how psychology understood weakness, sensitivity, and power. Across decades of clinical work, Carl Jung began noticing a specific group of patients. They came into his clinic exhausted, anxious, often depressed, convinced something was wrong with them. Jung realized these individuals weren't more sensitive than everyone else. They were processing reality at a deeper level. They perceived emotional currents others ignored, psychological patterns others missed, tensions others denied. Society looked at them and saw fragility. Jung looked at them and saw advanced perception. But here's where the tragedy begins, because no one ever explained what this perception was or how it was meant to be used. So instead of becoming powerful, these individuals became overwhelmed. Instead of being guided by their awareness, they were taught to suppress it. They were called too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Jung called them something else entirely. And what he discovered about what happens when this kind of perception is misunderstood, about how it eventually transforms, terrified him. And if you're one of these people, there's a reason this truth was never meant to be obvious. Here is the lie most empaths were taught so early they stopped questioning it, that they lack boundaries, that they feel too much, that something in them is defective and needs to be fixed. Carl Jung discovered the opposite. Empaths were never missing boundaries, they were missing instruction. No one ever taught them what their sensitivity actually was or how it was meant to function. So they did the only thing they could. They absorbed moods that weren't theirs, pain that didn't originate in them, responsibility that was never meant to belong to them. And absorption has consequences. First comes exhaustion, a tiredness sleep doesn't fix, a heaviness with no clear cause. Then comes self-doubt. You start asking what's wrong with you, why you're overwhelmed when nothing bad is happening, why other people seem fine while you feel like you're unraveling. This is where the damage really happens. Not because you're too sensitive, but because you were taught to mistrust your own perception. Every time you sensed tension and were told you were imagining it, every time you felt something shift and were accused of overreacting, you learn to override your inner data, and when you stop trusting your perception, you start turning it against yourself. Because what Jung uncovered wasn't a flaw, it was a power that had been pointed inward instead of understood. And once you see that, the entire story changes. You don't feel too much. You feel too accurately. This was the first spiritual ability Carl Jung identified in empathic individuals, and the one most consistently misunderstood. Empaths walk into a room and sense it immediately. Before a single word is spoken, something registers. The tension beneath politeness, the grief no one is naming, the quiet hostility hiding behind smiles, the anxiety humming in the background like static. These individuals were not generating emotion, they were perceiving emotional fields. Just as the eyes register light before the mind assigns meaning, the empath's nervous system registers emotional atmospheres before conscious thought has time to intervene. Emotion, Jung observed, does not live only inside individuals. It exists in space, between people, in rooms, relationships, and environments. Empaths are wired like radar systems for this invisible terrain. Here is where the ability turns destructive. Instead of perceiving, empaths absorb. They enter a tense space and leave feeling tense. They sit with someone grieving and go home feeling empty. They spend time with anxious people and wonder why their own body feels restless. Absorption feels natural, but it was never the function of this ability. Perception is meant to inform, not consume. You can see fire without stepping into it. You can recognize smoke without breathing it in. You can detect danger without becoming it. Jung called absorption a fundamental misapplication, a confusion between awareness and identity. And over time, this confusion erodes the empath from the inside. They carry emotions that were never theirs to process. They wake up exhausted without a clear cause. They begin to believe their own nervous system is unstable. This is not sensitivity. It is misuse. The correction Jung taught was deceptively simple, but life-changing. Every time a strong emotion arises, the empath must pause and ask, is this mine? Or did it appear when I entered this space? That single question creates separation, and separation creates survival. The moment an empath learns to distinguish what they feel from what they perceive, their entire relationship with sensitivity changes. They stop drowning in emotional currents and start reading them. This shift from absorption to observation is the difference between spiritual awareness and psychological self-destruction. Most empaths were never taught this distinction, and Jung believed that omission explained decades of unnecessary suffering, not because empaths felt too much, but because no one taught them how to stand where they were without being pulled under. You saw it coming, you just didn't trust yourself. This was the second ability Carl Jung documented in empathic individuals, and the one most likely to be betrayed by the empath themselves. Empaths don't simply feel emotions, they read patterns. Within minutes of meeting someone, something registers. A subtle inconsistency, a pause that doesn't match the words, a story that changes slightly each time it's told. These are not guesses, they are micro data points, tone shifts, micro expressions, body language contradictions, energy fluctuations that never quite settle. While most people need time and evidence, the empath's unconscious assembles this information instantly into a coherent picture, and the picture is often accurate. Jung discovered that empathic nervous systems are wired for rapid pattern recognition in human behavior. This ability did not evolve for comfort, it evolved for survival, especially in childhood environments where safety depended on reading the room correctly. Here is the fatal mistake. When the pattern recognition activates, empaths often override it, not because the data is unclear, but because the conclusion is uncomfortable. They sense manipulation and give the benefit of the doubt. They feel something is off and call themselves judgmental. They see the trajectory and choose hope instead. Jung called this the abandonment of inner knowing. Hope that contradicts perception is not optimism, it is self-betrayal. Empaths don't stay too long because they don't see the truth. They stay because they are trained to distrust it. They were taught that good people don't judge quickly, that spiritual people see the best in everyone, that leaving early makes you cold, selfish, or unkind, so they silence the very ability designed to protect them. The correct use of pattern recognition, Jung insisted, is not confrontation. Trust does not mean accusation. Trust does not mean explanation. Trust means adjustment. When the data flags someone as unsafe, you don't argue with it. You don't need proof. You don't need to convince anyone. You simply change your distance. Empaths who learn this develop what others mistake for intuition bordering on the supernatural. Jung knew better. They weren't predicting, they were reading. And the moment an empath stops overriding their perception with hope, their entire relational history changes. Not because they become harder, but because they finally stop walking past the exits their own awareness has been pointing to all along. Understanding someone doesn't make them safe. This was the third ability Carl Jung identified in empathic individuals, and the one he considered the most dangerous when misused. Empaths don't only perceive what people show, they perceive what people hide. The resentment beneath kindness, the rage beneath charm, the insecurity beneath control, the wound driving the behavior long before the behavior becomes visible. Jung called this shadow perception, the ability to sense the disowned parts of another person's psyche, the traits, impulses, and traumas they refuse to acknowledge. Most people can't see others' shadows because they can't face their own. Empaths don't have that luxury. Their nervous systems register shadow material automatically. They listen to a success story and sense the emptiness driving it. They feel the wounded child behind the abusive adult. And this is where empaths go catastrophically wrong. Instead of using shadow detection for discernment, they turn it into a rescue mission. They stay because they understand the trauma. They forgive because they see the wound. Jung was uncompromising here. This was the most destructive misuse of empathic perception he observed. Shadow detection is not a mandate to heal. It is not an obligation to fix. And it is certainly not a moral command to sacrifice yourself. Jung documented countless cases of empaths who destroyed their lives trying to heal people who were never interested in changing. They mistook insight for responsibility. They confused compassion with self-erasure. And Jung's warning was blunt. Understanding why someone is dangerous does not make them safe. Seeing the wounded child inside an adult does not neutralize the adult's capacity to harm. The correct use of shadow detection, Jung insisted, was compassionate discernment. You see people completely, what they show and what they hide, their light and their darkness, and then you choose. You can have compassion without proximity. You can recognize pain without volunteering to be the container for it. This is where many empaths resist because they were conditioned to believe that seeing pain creates responsibility. Jung rejected this completely. Perception is information. Information is meant to guide choices. Shadow detection exists to help you decide who is safe to be close to and who requires distance. When an empath finally accepts this, something profound shifts. They stop confusing sacrifice with love. They stop calling endurance virtue. They don't become cold. They become clear. And clarity, Jung knew, is what turns empathic perception from a liability into protection. This was the fourth ability Carl Jung identified in empathic individuals: trajectory perception. Empaths don't just sense what is happening, they sense where things are going. A relationship, a job, a friendship, a situation that hasn't broken yet, but is already drifting toward its ending. Jung was clear, this wasn't prophecy, it wasn't imagination, it was pattern extrapolation. Empaths unconsciously track micro-changes over time, shifts in energy, small inconsistencies, early signals that always precede collapse. Their nervous system reads the current and understands the destination long before others notice movement at all. And yet, Jung found this ability was almost always ignored. Empaths would feel the direction clearly and then override it with hope. Maybe it will change, maybe if I'm patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough. Jung had a name for this: self-betrayal disguised as hope. Hope, when it contradicts perception, is not virtue. It is denial wearing spiritual language. Empaths don't stay because they don't know. They stay because they don't want what they know to be true. And months later, when the ending finally arrives exactly as predicted, the devastation is doubled, not just from the loss, but from the realization, I knew this all along. Jung observed this moment was often more painful than the event itself, because it forced the empath to confront how deeply they had abandoned their own awareness. The correct use of trajectory perception, Jung insisted, was not drama. It was quiet action. You don't announce what you see. You don't argue with people who can't see it yet. You simply begin to move. Trajectory perception gives empaths something most people never have: lead time. If you can sense a relationship failing, you gain months to emotionally detach. If you sense a door closing, you can step away before it slams. This ability is not meant to make you cynical, it is meant to make you strategic. Empaths who learn to trust trajectory perception stop being shocked by endings. They recover faster. They stop mistaking endurance for loyalty. They don't become pessimistic. They become aligned with reality. And Jung believed this alignment, acting on what you perceive rather than what you wish, was one of the most mature expressions of empathic intelligence. Not reacting late, but choosing early, quietly, before the damage becomes unavoidable. Your nervous system isn't designed to carry everyone. This was the fifth ability Carl Jung identified in empathic individuals, and the one that destroys health the fastest when left unconscious. Energetic resonance is the empath's ability to synchronize emotionally with others. When you spend time with someone chaotic, your inner state fragments. This doesn't happen by choice, it happens automatically. Jung observed that this ability originally evolved for caregiving, especially for pre-verbal infants. A caregiver's nervous system resonates with the child's state, allowing needs to be met before words exist. It's a powerful bonding mechanism. But empaths didn't limit this ability to appropriate contexts. They resonated with everyone, all day, every interaction, every environment. By the end of the day, their nervous system had synchronized with 10 different emotional states and couldn't remember which one was theirs. Jung called this resonance without boundaries, and the consequences were severe. Chronic fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, mood swings without explanation, a constant sense of internal noise, a loss of baseline, the feeling of not knowing how you actually feel anymore. This wasn't emotional weakness, it was neurological overload. Your nervous system is designed to maintain coherence. When it's forced to attune endlessly without return, it collapses into exhaustion. The correction Jung taught was clear. Resonance must become conscious. You don't resonate with everyone automatically. You choose when to activate this ability, and with whom. And just as important, you learn how to return to yourself afterward. Jung taught simple practices, not rituals. A conscious breath after an interaction, a physical movement to reset the body, a clear internal statement, that's theirs, this is mine. The technique mattered less than the intention. What mattered was teaching the nervous system that resonance has an end point. Empathy is not meant to be permanent. It is meant to be selective. Empaths who learn this don't lose their compassion. They preserve it. They can sit fully present with someone in pain and then leave without carrying that pain home. They don't harden, they stabilize. And Jung believed this stabilization was essential because without the ability to consciously activate and deactivate resonance, empathy doesn't make you loving, it makes you depleted. And depletion, over time, turns even the most sensitive soul into someone who no longer has the energy to care at all. Seeing everything doesn't mean saying everything. This was the sixth ability Carl Jung identified in empathic individuals, and the one most likely to turn wisdom into isolation when misunderstood. Empaths don't experience reality on a single level. They perceive multiple layers at once, the words being spoken and the emotion beneath them, the story someone tells and the fear driving it, the image someone presents and the contradiction leaking through. Most people move through life focused on one layer at a time. Empaths register all of them simultaneously. This ability made empaths invaluable in therapeutic settings. They could identify the exact tension holding someone back. But in personal relationships, this ability became a liability because empaths made a critical mistake. They assumed that seeing clearly created responsibility. They pointed out inconsistencies. They challenged denial. They tried to help people see what they themselves were avoiding. Jung was firm about this. Perception does not create obligation. Seeing someone's truth does not mean it is your role to reveal it. Awareness is not consent to intervene. Most people are not ready for the depth empaths perceive. And forcing insight on someone who isn't prepared doesn't heal them. It destabilizes them. Jung observed that empaths who used dimensional perception this way were often labeled intense, invasive, or exhausting. Not because they were wrong, but because timing and consent matter in consciousness. The correct use of dimensional perception, Jung taught, was silent wisdom. You see all the layers, you hold the complete picture, and you let that understanding guide your choices, not other people's growth. You don't need to dismantle defenses that are still protecting someone's psyche. Instead, you ask a different question. Is this someone I can be close to? Is this environment safe for my nervous system? Is this a relationship that can meet me at the level I live? Dimensional perception exists to help you choose proximity, not to manage reality for others. Empaths who learn this stop feeling burdened by what they see. They stop carrying truths that were never theirs to deliver. They don't become silent out of fear. They become silent out of wisdom. And Jung believed this restraint, the ability to see deeply without needing to interfere, was one of the clearest signs of psychological maturity. Not blindness, but discernment. Because the deepest awareness often speaks loudest through what it chooses not to say. Empaths don't snap, they integrate. That's the part most people misunderstand. From the outside, it looks like something broke. The softness disappeared, the tolerance vanished. The person who used to absorb everything suddenly stopped. But Carl Jung knew this wasn't collapse, it was completion. Across his clinical work, Jung observed that empathic transformation almost always began the same way, with betrayal. Not a small disappointment, not miscommunication, but betrayal by someone the empath had protected, defended, and trusted completely. A partner, a family member, a close ally. What shattered the empath wasn't the act itself, it was the realization, I saw this coming and I didn't trust myself. That moment is the true catalyst. Jung called it the point where unconscious material overwhelms denial. The psyche can no longer maintain the lie, and something irreversible happens. The empath stops doubting their own perception. Not gradually, all at once. The absorber becomes a discerner. For years, the empath had carried two parallel realities: what they perceived and what they were told to believe. Betrayal collapses that split. The mind aligns with the nervous system. Perception and action finally match. This is what Jung meant by shadow integration. The empath's shadow was never cruelty or rage. It was their suppressed intelligence, their denied strength, their right to see clearly and act accordingly. Once integrated, the empath doesn't become aggressive. They become unnervingly calm. Jung documented this repeatedly. No screaming, no revenge, no dramatic confrontation, just clarity. They begin speaking truth, not emotionally, but precisely. They stop explaining themselves. They stop negotiating reality. And this is when something strange happens. Manipulative people feel it, not consciously, not logically, but at a nervous system level. Jung described what he called the predator's instinct. Those who rely on manipulation can sense when their tactics will no longer work. Integrated empaths don't argue, they don't defend, they don't need validation, and manipulators avoid them instinctively, the way nocturnal creatures avoid daylight. The empath's presence changes, not louder, not colder, just solid. Jung noted that after integration, These individuals could no longer be gaslighted. Their internal reference point was fixed. They trusted their perception completely. The result was psychological freedom. They left abusive relationships without drama. They cut contact without guilt. They rebuilt their lives with quiet precision. And most disturbing of all for Jung, the transformation was permanent. These empaths didn't return to people-pleasing. They didn't apologize for boundaries. They didn't second-guess themselves. They had become psychologically complete, still compassionate, still sensitive, but no longer available for exploitation. Jung wrote that this state often frightened others, not because the empath became dangerous, but because they became unreachable to manipulation. There was nothing to hook into anymore, no guilt leverage, no need for approval. The awakened empath doesn't threaten others, they threaten systems built on unconscious compliance. And Jung believed this was not a personal transformation, it was an evolutionary one. A human being capable of deep empathy without self-erasure, capable of perception without self-betrayal. The empath didn't lose their heart. They finally stopped sacrificing it. That is shadow integration, not becoming harder, but becoming whole. And once that happens, there is no going back. After decades of observing empathic individuals, Carl Jung reached a conclusion that simplified everything. These abilities were never meant for sacrifice. They were meant for navigation. Every empathic capacity you've heard about in this video exists for one purpose: to help you move through reality without losing yourself. When these abilities are used incorrectly, the empath becomes depleted. When they're used correctly, the empath becomes grounded. The difference is not sensitivity, it's choice to perceive without absorbing. You notice the emotional field without carrying it home. You let information register without letting it become identity, to trust without rescuing. You honor what your perception tells you without feeling responsible for fixing what you see. You don't override data with hope. You don't confuse understanding with obligation. To see without fixing, you recognize patterns, shadows, and contradictions without inserting yourself as the solution. You let insight guide your distance, not your intervention. To care with boundaries, you remain deeply compassionate but selective about where your energy flows. You stop treating availability as virtue. This is what Jung meant by the conscious empath. Not someone who shuts down their abilities, not someone who hardens or becomes detached, but someone who uses perception deliberately. Sensitivity without choice becomes self-erasure. Choice without sensitivity becomes coldness. The integrated empath holds both. They feel deeply and decide carefully. This is not about becoming less empathic. It's about becoming accurate. When you use your abilities as navigation tools rather than moral obligations, something stabilizes inside you. Your nervous system finds its baseline again. Your relationships become clearer. Your life stops feeling like constant emotional labor. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself in the name of being kind. Jung believed this was the final lesson for empaths. You are not here to carry the world. You are here to read it. And once you learn to do that consciously, your sensitivity stops being a burden and becomes exactly what it was meant to be. You don't need to turn your abilities off. You were never meant to shut them down. You were meant to use them correctly. That was Carl Jung's final and most misunderstood insight. Empathy is not a flaw to be cured. It is not a weakness to be managed. It is a psychological evolution, a more advanced way of perceiving reality. The problem was never your sensitivity. The problem was being taught to sacrifice yourself for it. When you learn to perceive without absorbing, to trust without rescuing, to care with boundaries and choose with clarity, your abilities stop draining you. They start grounding you. You don't become colder. You become sovereign. You feel everything. and you decide what deserves your energy. That is the conscious empath, not someone who feels less, someone who chooses more. And if you're at the point where you no longer doubt what you see and feel, where your perception no longer needs permission, comment this: I perceive, but I choose. Because that choice is where your real power begins.